Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Lowell Wise. I'm Executive Director of Tacoma Tree Foundation, for those of you who don't know me, and really happy to be here tonight. Thank you so much for joining. I see a lot of familiar names in the audience. This is our Tree Talk series, and we're trying a new time slot here in the evening. And so really happy to be here. And this is part of our education program that's funded by Tacoma Creates. And so we're really excited to be doing this work, and happy to be presenting this topic tonight on our project with the Nature Conservancy in Washington and Dr. Ailene Ettinger. So thank you so much. We have a couple of things to mention as we're getting started. And the first is just to acknowledge where we are. So I'm here in Tacoma at the mouth of the Puyallup River. And of course, this is the land that has been cared for by the Puyallup people for generations and generations. And we're so grateful that we can be here together and share this land and just acknowledge that this is where the Puyallup people live. They're our neighbors and they speak the Lushootseed language. And so I think it's especially important for us as an organization that does work that affects the landscape to acknowledge this relationship. So that brings me to our introduction of our speaker tonight. And our speaker is Ailene Ettinger. Ailene is a quantitative ecologist for the Nature Conservancy in Washington. She has studied many different things: old growth forests in the Northwest here, tropical bee communities and coffee farms, and resident killer whales, as well as many other topics. Currently, she helps develop the evidence base for the Nature Conservancy's efforts to protect and restore lands in Washington. Ailene grew up in Maine and moved to Seattle in 2007. Ailene has a PhD in biology from the University of Washington, focusing on community ecology, climate change, and urban ecology. And she loves the outdoors, has lots of interests. And so I'm really happy to be working with Ailene as a partner on the project that you're about to hear more about this evening, which is the project in South Tacoma. And just on a personal note, Tacoma Tree Foundation has been working with the Nature Conservancy for a couple of years now, actually before my time as director of the organization. And I feel like it's a really great relationship. And so I'm so excited that Ailene can be here to share about her work and specifically what's going on with the South Tacoma neighborhood. So thank you very much. And Ailene, over to you.
Thanks so much, Lowell. Thank you for having me. And I'm so excited and honored to be here and excited to talk about this project. I'm excited to be launching this project with Lowell and the Tacoma Tree Foundation and the City of Tacoma. So yes, I'm excited to be talking about urban trees, climate resilience, and equity with you all this evening. Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to be talking about a project called GRIT, Greening Research in Tacoma, that I'm working on with a really great team of people. So these include folks from the Nature Conservancy, the University of Washington, Tacoma Tree Foundation, and the City of Tacoma. I'm going to start the talk by doing some general sort of discussion of science around urban trees, climate resilience, and equity. And then move on to talking specifically about our GRIT project. And then after, hopefully have lots of time for questions. I'm really hoping you'll listen and think about questions. I really love hearing questions from people. So hopefully we'll have lots of time for that. Before I launch into these topics, I did want to just say a little bit about myself and the organization that I am representing. So as Lowell mentioned, I grew up in Maine and moved to Washington to get my PhD, and really just fell in love with the land and water and people here after especially after spending hours counting seedlings for my PhD. I really felt a deep connection to the land, and my partner and I decided to stay and raise our family here. So we are just really grateful to be here. in this beautiful place. And the Nature Conservancy of Washington has believes that nature and people can thrive together. We are a state chapter that's a subset of an international organization. We have lots of preserves around the state, so hopefully you've had a chance to visit some of them. If you haven't, please do. But we do other work that is not so place-based as well, such as this great partnership with Tacoma Tree Foundation and other folks in Tacoma. In addition to the work in Washington State, we do work all over the world. So it's the largest conservation organization, and really grateful to have excellent partners like the Tacoma Tree Foundation all over the world. Okay, so if you're like me, you may have the memory of last summer's heat waves really burned on your brain, and like you can feel it in your body. I can still feel the oppressive heavy air that was enveloping us last June, and then again last August during a couple of serious heat events. I can even taste that salty sweat that I felt, and really remember the dread that I felt one night going upstairs to my bedroom, which is the only room in our house where we have a portable air conditioning unit going, and despite the fact that it was going all day, it was still 95 degrees when I went up to bed at night. So this just kind of, shows how, a lot of the buildings, our homes, our communities, even the roads here really weren't built to handle the kind of heat we experienced last summer. And indeed, it really was record-setting heat. So you can see here, this was from a news media post last June, in the midst or the aftermath of one of the heat events, just showing those red dots there, really how dramatically high the temperatures were during that heat event. And unfortunately, this isn't really an isolated event. This is part of a global trend of global warming. So temperatures are rising across our country. You can see this heat map. There were a lot of record-setting temperatures in the contiguous United States last June. So it was part of a bigger pattern in space. And then, of course, it's part of a long trend that science is increasingly understanding of global warming. And that heat events like what we experienced last summer are likely to increase in frequency with global warming. Indeed, they have been increasing. So the number of days above 82 degrees Fahrenheit have increased by 50% in the last 20 years in the Seattle-Tacoma area. The good news is that there are some great natural tools that we can employ to help buffer some of the challenges posed by climate change, and those are trees. So trees have the ability to buffer impacts such as heat islands. So you may have heard cities like Seattle, where I live in South Seattle, have lots of hard surfaces that tend to trap and store heat really well, so that it holds heat, and these areas tend to be hotter by up to 22 degrees sometimes than areas with more shade. So urban trees can actually work to reduce this heat island effect by providing shade. And urban trees also are able to buffer other impacts of climate change. So they can help control erosion and reduce the impacts of drought. They can also help support infiltration and reduce flood risks that may be associated with climate change. In addition, they can help mitigate air pollution that is exacerbated by climate change. So as air temperatures warm, ground level ozone, for example, and other smog and pollutants impact people's health on a daily basis. So all that is exacerbated by heat. But urban trees can help transform some of that air pollution into easier to breathe substances. And they can also reduce the use of heating and cooling. So that can lead to lower pollution through reducing our energy usage. And of course, they can directly draw down carbon from the atmosphere. So all these are examples of ways that trees can really help buffer the impacts of climate change. And in this way, they really enhance our climate resilience as humans and the climate resilience of the urban ecosystems by their presence. And in addition to these environmental benefits of climate resilience, urban trees also offer, a wealth of human benefits, human health benefits. And these include human mental health and physical health and well-being. But in addition, links have also been made between mental health and social cohesion. Trees have been found to increase community cohesion, and links have been even made between trees, urban tree plantings, and reductions in crime. So there are a number of benefits of urban trees that we are increasingly becoming aware of, and some of them are shown here. But all this is to say that there are really many benefits of urban trees that can provide, and they're increasingly becoming aware, and we are increasingly studying them in the scientific community. And all this increased awareness has led to many cities having ambitious tree canopy goals. So for example, in Tacoma, you may be aware that the urban forestry program has a goal to increase tree canopy cover by from approximately 20% to about 30% by 2030. That's just one example. Many cities, New York, Seattle, cities around the country have pretty ambitious tree goals to try to take advantage of these great benefits that many trees offer. In Tacoma, they're hoping to achieve this increase in canopy by planting trees with help from partner organizations like Tacoma Tree Foundation and the Nature Conservancy, and also through community members, and by preserving existing healthy trees. So it may sound like planting trees is a relatively simple and straightforward solution to climate change, but this is not the case. Even though trees are an effective natural climate solution, planting trees is anything but a simple solution. So one of the reasons why this is actually not such a simple solution is that if you look at the current landscape of urban communities, trees are not distributed equitably. And you may have heard the term tree equity. It's been in the news quite a bit recently. So here in Seattle, there was a heat mapping project that results were released across King County showing that there were inequitable impacts of the hot summers here in Seattle. And across the country, similar things have been shown due to inequitable tree distributions, leading to hotter temperatures, especially in lower income and lower resourced communities. So here I'm showing a figure with median tree cover, so the percentage of surface area covered by trees on the y-axis, and on the x-axis is income. And this is from a study by a colleague at the Nature Conservancy, the North America Nature Conservancy. So this study existed across the contiguous United States. They were interested in comparing tree cover across different neighborhoods in cities and found this really stark relationship of increasing tree cover with income. And this has been seen in city after city across the US. It's a striking relationship that drives the tree inequities that I mentioned. It's important though in looking at this graph to realize that this is a strong correlative relationship or a correlative association, but it's not directly causal. So the underlying causes of this relationship are complex and likely rooted in sort of historical, social, political, economic, and environmental patterns. And just as an example of the type of complexities that drive this pattern, I'm going to talk a little bit about redlining. So redlining was a racial discriminatory housing policy that was established by the federal government. The federal government had a homeowners loan corporation, or HOLC, corporation that was established in the 1930s. And for decades, this organization controlled federal homeowner loans through this process that's become known as redlining. And so I'm showing here a map from this era of Tacoma with the redlined areas, which are known as sort of shown in red on the map. And so what the HOLC zones did was sort of determine ranking systems for different neighborhoods, and you can see those as delineated by different colors on the map. So A was considered best neighborhoods, and down to D, which was considered or termed hazardous neighborhoods. And a lot of times these areas were really racially and socioeconomically, the socioeconomics and racial makeup of those neighborhoods is what drove the decisions. So redlining really limited access to homeownership and wealth for decades afterwards among people of color. And this contributed to incredibly adverse social and economic outcomes, including poverty, that were created by these zones and that have been really well studied and documented. It's still present today. More recently, people have started looking additionally into some of the environmental effects of associated with redlining. And one of these studies, I'm just posting the reference here, but sort of looked across the United States and found really stark relationships of reduced tree canopy in redlined areas compared with other neighborhoods and cities across the US. So tree canopy cover was on average 23% in those redlined or D areas versus 43% in the higher income grade A areas that were primarily composed of high socioeconomic white families. And so, of course, as I mentioned, these legacies of racist housing policy were incredibly harmful for people in many ways. They also have reduced climate change resilience for the urban trees that exist in those neighborhoods. So in addition to lower tree canopy cover, they're associated with those neighborhoods are higher rates of pollution in redlined areas and higher vulnerability potentially to invasive species due to the species makeup of the trees that were planted in those areas. And so these kinds of other environmental changes in redlined areas further exacerbate existing inequities in tree canopy, potentially making neighborhoods even less resilient to climate change in the future. So really harmful legacies of past racist housing policies. Just one example of some of the complexities that kind of underlie these relationships in tree equity that we see and start to show how some of the complexities behind addressing this issue. A lot of these studies that I've mentioned have been really kind of taken a zoomed out perspective or zoomed out approach using, for example, satellite imagery to quantify tree canopy cover and then correlating it with existing data on socioeconomics. So a really kind of coarse or zoomed out approach to looking at the problem. And it's helpful in highlighting some of these correlative relationships, but that approach is missing a lot of detail and complexity that we can really only understand through on the ground research and collaborative work with communities experiencing tree inequities. And I think that there's a real need for this kind of collaborative on the ground research and community work to better understand and address tree equity issues, especially in the face of climate change, which is likely to exacerbate these problems. So these issues, these important issues are sort of all the background and the national landscape that I think about with our work in Tacoma. And Tacoma, like many of the cities that I mentioned, is home to a diverse canopy of trees, but those trees, that tree cover is inequitably distributed like so many cities in much of the way that I've just described. And so, for example, there's tend to be lower tree cover in South Tacoma, much higher tree cover you can kind of see up here in North Tacoma. And as you might expect, that's also associated with differences in temperature. So South Tacoma has, where the lower tree canopy occurs, also experiences much hotter temperatures and experiences greater numbers of days above 82 degrees. So if we dig into this, what's happening on the ground in South Tacoma a little bit more, I think it offers a lot of opportunities to learn some of the complexities behind addressing tree inequity, and I think learning ways to approach this problem in hopefully more effective ways in the future. So the city has been working along with community organizations and residents together to grow more trees in Tacoma and address this problem, especially in the South Tacoma Mall area. So my colleagues at the Nature Conservancy have been working there for a number of years, and some of them might be on the call today and able to answer some questions at the end, I hope, but have been working especially on green storm and installations in the area and addressing other components of benefits of green infrastructure. And more recently, the city has begun to address this problem by doing a large district green infrastructure project. So this is in the Madison infrastructure, Madison district area. You might be familiar with this project. It's just about to launch. The city's been probably communicating with members of the neighborhood about this project, and it's underway or about to be underway. And as part of this, there will be, among other things, a number of trees planted, about 300 or more trees planted in the Tacoma Mall area. And so this project was already underway and planned to occur. And we at the Nature Conservancy and started discussions with the city and with Tacoma Tree Foundation about opportunities to really learn from this installation as it's happening, to get some of that on the ground data as it's happening, to understand how community members are experiencing this. And how both the environment is changing as a result of this project and as a result of ongoing construction in the neighborhood, and also of starting to hopefully understand some of the human well-being and community effects, how community members are experiencing this. So this is how we developed the Screening Research in Tacoma, or GRIT project. And I do really see South Tacoma as a great and unusual opportunity of a lot of people in the community working together to help improve green infrastructure in this neighborhood. And hopefully we and community members living there can be in communication and understand how this process is affecting people and the environment as these changes go into effect. So this research is really just launching, just getting started, and we've started installing temperature loggers around the neighborhood. So if you're living in this area, you might have seen structures that look like this on utility poles in the area. We've been really fortunate to have support from Tacoma Power and Lumen, who graciously allowed us to install temperature loggers on their utility poles. And this top photo is showing just a temperature logger on a tree. Along the streets, we need to install radiation shields around them to just to prevent solar radiation, which can lead to inaccurate temperature readings on these loggers. So these have been installed throughout this neighborhood, shown by this green outline here, so that we can start to get a better understanding of how trees affect temperature, how long it takes for some of the benefits of trees to be realized, and how those benefits might change with tree size and tree age and tree distribution. So we're hoping to really start to untangle some of the complexities of tree planting and how it can contribute to climate change resilience in neighborhoods from the environmental perspective. And then the next phase is starting to conduct surveys of residents in this community to understand how they're experiencing this greening. And so we're working, this component of the project will be led by Greg Bratman, who's a professor at University of Washington. And that part of the project is also just kind of at its inception. So I'm really excited to see how that work all goes, and hoping to engage community members and learn from you all in this process. So let's see, I'm putting up here just a few links if you're curious to learn more. And also, please do not hesitate to email me if you have questions about the project or anything I've talked about today. Also, we've got lots of time now for questions, so I'd love to hear what people are curious about.
Thank you so much for that. This is great. We do have a couple questions already in the Q&A box. There's a question here in the direct chat, which is there a need for stronger laws to be enacted in Tacoma to prevent mature trees from being cut down? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I do think that tree protection laws can be a tool for ensuring that large mature trees are not cut down, and it is really large mature trees that provide outsized benefits to people. Provide the bulk of these natural climate solutions really come from large established trees. It takes a long time for trees to get to that point to be able to provide large canopy cover for shade, and the bigger the tree, the more carbon is sequestered and all of that. So protecting those large trees is really invaluable, and it can be a really useful tool.
Absolutely. I have lots of comments on this, of course, as leading the Tree Foundation. The tree protections in Tacoma are not very strong. And so we don't have a lot of tools, as you said, to kind of keep those mature trees in the ground and keep them from being cut down. So one of the things that we do is push for better regulations and better policy at the city level. And so we actually have an advocacy committee that is from our board, and the advocacy committee is open to anyone in the public. If you want to learn more about kind of common sense tree regulations that we'd like to see happen, feel free to contact us. I'll send my email in the chat, our info email and my personal email too. Really important question here. Does GRIT have any local BIPOC on the team or staff?
Yeah, that's a great question and a great point. So we do have on our team, we have BIPOC members who don't happen to live in Tacoma, but we do want to engage as many as much diversity from the community in our research. And as part of our project, we also have a community engagement and community science component that we're just getting started. And so we would really like to engage all members of the community, anyone who's interested in that component. So
Yeah, and I'll just add too that Tacoma Tree Foundation, being a partner on this, we have people of color on our staff, and we have bilingual staff. So we're doing some activities in Spanish in this neighborhood. And so you can keep an eye on our events calendar for like our Spanish language tree walks and so on. But yeah, I think this is a great question and a great need that we should be responding to. We're also reaching out with partners in the neighborhood, like the Asia Pacific Cultural Center, to hopefully host events in the future. So we're trying to bring this program to everyone in the neighborhood. And on that note, there's a related question, I guess, about geographic availability, and that is, can folks complete the survey if they live outside the area? So we can see this map on the screen now of the general project area. It's kind of circling the mall and parts of South Tacoma. But I think this is a question about the human well-being study from UW. And so can folks do that if they don't live in that area?
Yeah, I think the plan to start is for the study to be restricted to people within that South Tacoma area, so within the bounds of that green a polygon on the map there. So I believe that's the plan, at least for the current time.
Yeah, I think that confirms what I know too, and it's specifically related to changes in the tree coverage in a certain neighborhood. So I think both these studies are kind of working on a hyper local level. And so that's why at this point, we're inviting people from the specific neighborhood to complete the survey. The link to the survey, I should say, is not quite ready to go, but you can look for it in the next couple of weeks on our homepage. So the Tacoma Tree Foundation.org webpage is where this is going to live. Let's see, there's another question here from Georgette, and that is, with many more apartments currently being built within our city, creating more density of people and cars, isn't there an even more urgent need to plant trees throughout our city? Couldn't developers be required to contribute financially to planting more trees?
Well, I really love that idea. And this question gets at a point that I meant to bring up when I was talking about the complexities of tree planting. So I really focused on inequity, but there's many other complexities that make tree planting not just a simple solution. So there is this, like, the fact that there is ongoing new construction that's really needed in the area where there's a housing crisis. But at the same time, that's further making it difficult to find space and appropriate space for trees to be planted. And so, that balance is really tricky. And it's also hard to keep pace with the ongoing development that's happening. So it is complex, and I love the idea of tree planting being required. Of course, the devil is always in the details, as they say. So I'm not sure about how to make that happen on a local scale, but certainly something worth looking into.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would just add to that, I think that everyone kind of has a role to play. We're all part of this urban forest. And so it's got to be, in terms of increasing tree coverage, a blend, right, of city policies, good development practices, private residences and property owners, all of us kind of doing our part. And so that's why we're looking for lots of places where we can plant trees as an organization and continue to build community in specific neighborhoods.
Yeah, I did. Sorry, that reminds me of something I also really wanted to meant to address in my talk that I failed to, which was, it's great to have some sort of requirements of tree planting in some ways, or protection of trees, as Lowell mentioned, but It's also really critical that a lot of this come from residents and people living in the community as well, because it is another reason why I say it's not a simple solution, is there have been other studies that have found, gentrification that occurs in association with greening. And so that leads to people getting pushed out and thus not able to experience the benefits that these trees are supposed to provide. That's another reason why I feel like this on the ground work in combination across, social and human aspects as well as environmental aspects is really important to better understand that. And hopefully we really want everyone to be able to enjoy the benefits that urban trees can provide. So how to make that happen is the challenge.
Can you elaborate more on the temperature monitors and the quote, TNC will also work with community members to develop community-led science projects. So if you could give us some more context about maybe the spirit of the community science project and specifically the temperature logger installations.
Yeah, well, so the temperature logger installations right now are, we're not a community science effort. I mean, that was led by our GRIT team and installed by our team on the landscape. So they are called hobos. They're about this big. They're tiny hobo onset data loggers, and they're hobo pendants, I guess they're called. And they were recording temperature every hour consistently, and we go and download the data regularly. But we are, as part of this research, is funded through an award from the Puget Sound Partnership. And as part of this work, we are really hoping to launch a community science project that is partly driven perhaps by what we see as science needs, but more so we're interested in growing some community connections and learning from the community what they're interested in learning more about or feel like what research is needed there. So it's in its early, I can't even say it's in its early stages because we haven't even really started that aspect of the project yet. But we will start with the community advisory committee and then work on building from there and hope to engage folks in helping us understand what's needed, what people are curious about related to trees in their neighborhood, and what might benefit from some research and some data to help understand more how trees are affecting the neighborhood. So I'm not sure what it will look like. We're hoping that folks in the community will be excited about some aspects of this and help us shape it a bit more.
Yeah, and just to add on to that a little bit, Tacoma Tree Foundation is kind of the main local partner in addition to the City of Tacoma, but we're doing the community outreach aspect of this. So we've actually been doing work in this neighborhood specifically for a couple of years already. And so we're looking to build on those relationships with people that we already know in the neighborhood. And then there is this community advisory group, which is open to anyone who lives in the neighborhood or works or plays in the neighborhood. And so, yeah, we're looking to hear from folks in addition to the people that we already know. And yeah, so that's one of the reasons we're planning several events in the neighborhood in the next year and a half or so. And yeah, just really excited to continue this as our neighborhood of focus for the next year and a half. I wanted to zoom out a little bit and ask a question myself, which is that I know that you did some research on Mount Rainier. I think it was your PhD dissertation, right? And so I'm just curious what it's like to shift from working in kind of a national park setting, more of a preserved landscape, to working in a more urban setting with different conditions and everything. And then maybe how that relates to how the Nature Conservancy is thinking about this project and other projects.
Yeah, really interesting questions. Yeah, so I mean, a lot of my PhD work was focused on Mount Rainier, where I was studying how climate change is affecting forests there and how tree species ranges might shift with climate change. But I also did urban forest research here in Seattle as part of my dissertation as well. It actually wasn't included in my dissertation, but it was during my dissertation. So we were looking at barriers to regeneration of conifers in urban forests, and also effects of temperature and nitrogen on tree regeneration in forested parks in Seattle, as well as in outlying areas. So I have been drawn to doing research in cities since I started my PhD, and I don't know, I guess I've lived in cities for a while now, and I always notice what's around me, and so that's made me curious about it. And so that's kind of what drove me to do urban research, was simply because it was there. It was the environment that I lived in, and so I had lots of questions that kept coming up about it. But it is different in a lot of ways. I mean, the national park system is, much of it is aimed at excluding people from certain areas. And so in some ways that makes it easier to do research, because you don't have to worry about people messing up your plots or people disturbing your equipment. But on the other hand, I think it creates a kind of, even though unnatural is probably the wrong word, but unrealistic in some ways situation to what is covering a lot of the planet, which is people interacting with forests. And so I do really enjoy to exclude that component, I think is not giving a full picture, at least of what's on much of the landscape of the world. So I do really enjoy doing urban ecology for that reason, although it can be challenging. When I was doing my research on barriers to tree regeneration, one of the things we were looking at was the effects of ivy on conifer tree regeneration. And in one of the plots where we had set up this very neat and tidy experimental design, where some plots had ivy present, some plots had ivy removed, and someone, a very interested person visiting the park, had removed all the invasive ivy from the whole area because they felt like it was a problem, and it was, and in many cases it is outcompeting native vegetation. So, which I loved that they were excited about taking a step towards trying to restore natural vegetation communities or native vegetation communities. But at the moment I was sad that I had to get rid of that plot. Or ruin the experimental treatment.
Yeah.
So challenges like that, do exist in urban areas. But it's also the people that make it exciting to be there and interesting in a different way. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember as we were kind of putting in those temperature loggers around South Tacoma, you were commenting about how you used to count trees, and now you're kind of looking for the electric poles that we're attaching those loggers to.
Yeah.
There's still large stands of wood, but it's a different context completely.
Different concept.
Well, this is fantastic. Looking at our project map here, just to the northwest edge of it, there's been a project proposed to build a couple, or 4 actually, very large warehouses recently. I don't know if you're up on that conversation or not, Ailene, but one of our audience members is asking about the warehouse project that's going to be impacting the South Tacoma neighborhood.
I don't know, I'm not familiar with the details on that. I guess I've heard about it. I think at a recent GRIT team meeting, there was an article shared about some of the warehouses going in. So I'm not sure exactly what the question is, but it does make it's one of the reasons why teasing apart how much trees can contribute to mitigating urban heat island effects. It makes it really challenging when you have ongoing increases in construction in some areas, and probably hard surfaces being added to the neighborhood at the same time that you're planting trees. So it does make it's certainly a challenge to try to disentangle all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll probably catch up on this soon because it's kind of been a fast developing story here, and it's one that's really going to affect the neighborhood. One of our staff members lives not too far from this area and has worked in the neighborhood too, and has commented that the area that's currently mostly open space, but also a super fun site that's been associated with some heavy industry in the past. Just he's worried about the loss of wildlife habitat and the effects to air quality and so on. And I will also say that our board of Tacoma Tree Foundation recently kind of looked at all this and submitted a public comment to the city in opposition of that project. So that was kind of the result of the advocacy committee work. And if you are someone in the audience who cares about that project and other impacts to tree canopy and water quality and well-being and everything, and invite you all to get in touch with us and attend our advocacy committee, because we might have some opportunities for you to get new information or have your voice heard in a different way. So I'm going to just finish up here by typing in our email address in the chat. It's info@tacomatreefoundation.org, and my email address is lowell@tacomatreefoundation.org. And so I'll just put those here in the chat for everyone. And feel free to send us an email, especially if you live in this neighborhood, but also if you have other comments or questions related to the content for tonight or the GRIT project in general, please feel free to contact us. So with that, I want to say thanks, Ailene. It's really great to see you and to have you here with us and for sharing about the project. Yeah, so thanks to our audience members. Wonderful to see your names here, and thanks for the questions and comments, and keep in touch.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And with that, we'll end the webinar. Good night, everyone.